Sometimes the person you love the most is the one who leaves the deepest scar. That truth hit Daniel Walker, a calm, soft-spoken man from Texas, the night everything he believed in cracked open. For most of his life, Daniel had been the kind of man who forgave easily, who trusted too quickly, who believed that love, when given sincerely, always came back the same way. And for a long time, it did, especially when Emily Lawson walked into his life, a woman with bright eyes, soft laughter, and a way of speaking that made the rest of the world seem quieter. He planned everything with her, dreams, home, a future, until the night he discovered something that pulled the ground right from beneath him. Daniel had always imagined betrayal as something loud, shouting, chaos, slam doors, but when the truth came for him, it came quietly, in a message he wasn't meant to see, a conversation Emily had been hiding, a secret she'd buried, hoping he'd never find out. It wasn't a simple lie. It was the kind that fractures a heart in places you didn't know existed. And when Daniel read it, his breath caught, his chest felt tight, the world felt colder, as if someone had blown out the light inside him. For days afterward, Daniel moved like a ghost inside his own life. He went to work, came home, made dinner, but none of it felt real. Nights were the worst. He'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the same question echo inside him. How do you forgive someone you love when they're the reason your heart is bleeding? And the more he asked it, the heavier it became. Emily noticed, of course, the distance, the quiet, the way Daniel's eyes no longer softened when he looked at her. She tried to smile, tried to talk, but guilt sits heavily on the innocent and crushes the guilty. And she knew which one she was. Every time she opened her mouth to explain, her words broke before they reached him. Daniel didn't yell, not once. That was the part that frightened her. The silence. His silence. Inside him, a war was raging. One part of him begged to forgive, because love doesn't disappear in a day. But the other part, the wounded part, wasn't ready to release the pain. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't just hurt, it transforms. It changes the way you breathe, the way you move, the way you trust. And slowly, something dark began forming inside Daniel. Not anger, not hatred, but clarity. A clarity that whispered, you can forgive someone and still never let them back into the place they broke. That clarity would become the seed of something he never expected, something that, weeks later, would turn into the quietest, coldest revenge he ever imagined.
Daniel didn't sleep much in the days that followed, not because he didn't try, but because his mind wouldn't let him rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face, smiling, laughing, pretending everything was fine, while knowing now that something dark was hidden behind those eyes. What hurt him the most wasn't just the secret. It was the thought that she had looked him in the eyes, kissed him, made promises to him, all while carrying a truth that could break him. And once he realized that, he couldn't stop replaying every interaction, every memory, every moment where she seemed distant or distracted. It was like his brain was trying to rewrite the past with the new truth he had learned. He became quieter around the people he knew. His mother noticed it first during a phone call. "Daniel, honey, you sound tired. Are you okay?" He wanted to tell her everything, but he couldn't form the words, so he simply said, "Just busy, Mom." And even over the phone, he could feel her concern. But he didn't want anyone else involved. This heartbreak felt too personal, too raw, like a wound that was still open and bleeding. At work, his colleagues noticed the shift too. Daniel was usually the calm one, The guy who never raised his voice, never rushed, never stressed. But now he seemed lost in thought. Sometimes he'd stare at his computer screen without blinking, his mind drifting back to Emily, wondering how long she had been hiding things, wondering if she ever felt guilty before he found out. Even during breaks when his friends joked around, Daniel simply nodded, forcing a small smile just to seem normal. Inside, though, everything was falling apart. And Emily knew it. She felt the distance growing between them like a thick fog. She tried calling him, texting him, asking to meet, but Daniel kept avoiding her. He needed space, and he wasn't sure if seeing her would make things better or worse. Sometimes he'd pick up the phone, read her messages, and feel a mixture of anger and longing. He hated that he still missed her, that even after the truth her voice could still calm his heart, and that only made the pain sharper. One evening, Daniel stood in his apartment, staring at the framed photos on his shelf. Pictures of him and Emily smiling at the beach, at a Christmas party, at a friend's wedding. For a long moment, he just stared, trying to understand how something that looked so perfect from the outside could feel so broken now. His hand slowly reached toward one picture, the one where Emily hugged him from behind, her face resting on his shoulder. He remembered how warm that moment felt, and now it felt like a lie. But even as he considered taking the picture down, something inside him stopped him. He whispered to himself, "I'm not ready to erase anything yet." Because despite the pain, he still loved her, and that was the most painful part of all. The internal conflict inside him grew stronger with each passing day. Sometimes he thought he should walk away, cut ties, let the wound heal naturally. Other times he felt he needed answers, real answers from Emily. And then there were moments when he wanted to forgive her, not for her sake, but for his own peace. But forgiveness wasn't simple. It wasn't a switch he could flip. It was a long process, and Daniel wasn't even sure he wanted to begin it. One night, as he sat alone in his living room, the world silent around him, Daniel finally let himself cry. The tears were slow at first, quiet, but then the storm inside him finally broke. He pressed his hands to his eyes, his chest tightening as he let out a shaky breath. "How do you forgive someone who has changed the way you see them?" he whispered to the darkness, because that was the truth. Emily's secret had changed everything. It changed the trust, the foundation, the peace he once felt around her. And even if he forgave her someday, things would never be exactly the same again. A crack, once made, never fully disappears. By the time the sun began to rise, Daniel felt exhausted. But in that exhaustion, a strange clarity began to form. Avoiding Emily forever wouldn't help. Pretending he didn't care wouldn't bring closure. And bottling everything inside was slowly destroying him. He needed to face this. He needed to hear her explanation, not over texts or calls, but face to face, even if it hurt, even if it broke him again. So he picked up his phone and typed a short message. "We need to talk. Tomorrow evening." He stared at the message for a long moment before pressing send. His hand trembled as he placed the phone down, knowing that this was the beginning of something. Maybe healing, maybe destruction, maybe something darker. When Emily replied within seconds, "Yes, I'll be there," Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he would forgive her, confront her, or finally walk away. But he knew one thing. Tomorrow would decide everything. Because some truths demand to be spoken, even if they burn.
Daniel walked out of the diner that night with the kind of silence that sinks deep into a man's bones. The kind of silence that carries both peace and ache at the same time. The night air felt colder than usual, brushing against his skin as if reminding him that some decisions, once made,
never truly stop echoing. He stepped onto the empty sidewalk, his footsteps steady, but inside him, something was trembling. Not regret, not fear, something else. The awareness that he had just crossed a line he could never uncross, a line between who he had been and who he was becoming. The sky above him was a deep, endless blue, scattered with faint stars. He paused for a moment, letting his thoughts drift upward, letting the heaviness sit with him. Back inside the diner, Emily was still crying. He knew she was. He had seen the way her voice broke, the way her hands shook, the way her eyes searched his face for mercy. And even though he forgave her, or something close to forgiveness, there was a part of him she would never reach again. A part that had hardened, quietly, like steel cooling in the dark. He walked to his truck, opened the door, and sat there for a long moment before turning the ignition. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedarwood, familiar, old, grounding. He gripped the steering wheel, staring out the windshield at nothing in particular. Forgiveness isn't about fixing anything, he whispered under his breath. It's choosing what kind of man I want to be. But as the words left his mouth, he felt the sting behind them. Choosing who to be meant letting go of who he used to be. And that was a kind of grief no one warns you about. As he started driving, the road stretched ahead like a ribbon of dim light. Texas nights had a way of swallowing sound, swallowing thought. But tonight, Daniel's mind refused to stay quiet. Images of Emily kept flashing through his head, the way she looked the day they first met, laughing at something silly he had said, the way she reached for him when she was scared, the way she had once told him he was her safe place. Safe place. Those words hurt now, like salt pressed into a wound. How could he have been her safe place when she wasn't his? His phone buzzed beside him. He glanced at the screen. Emily. Again. He didn't pick up, not because he didn't care, but because caring wasn't the problem. Caring was the problem. Love, once shaken, becomes something sharp, something unpredictable, and he needed distance, space, time to breathe without feeling her shadow on his chest. He pulled over near a quiet stretch of road overlooking an open field. The tall grass moved gently under the night wind, almost like it was breathing. Daniel stepped out of the truck and leaned against the hood, looking at the horizon. He closed his eyes, allowing the cool air to steady him. He thought about his father's words he hadn't remembered in years. Son, when someone hurts you, forgiveness isn't about letting them in, it's about letting yourself out. He never understood it as a boy, but now those words felt carved into his heart. Daniel inhaled deeply and let his thoughts rewind, back to before the betrayal, back to when everything between him and Emily felt simple, clean, untouched. He remembered the road trips they took together, playing old country songs with the windows rolled down. He remembered the nights they spent talking until sunrise. He remembered how she looked when she first told him she loved him, her voice trembling like she was confessing something sacred. And for a moment, he wondered if those memories were real, or if they were just stories he told himself to feel less alone. A soft vibration buzzed again, a text this time. He didn't check it. Instead, he tilted his head back and looked at the sky. Clouds were drifting slowly, cutting thin lines across the moon. He felt small beneath it, but somehow stronger too, because standing there in the quiet, he realized something he hadn't admitted before. He wasn't just forgiving Emily. He was forgiving himself for trusting, for loving, for hoping, for breaking. The wind picked up, and with it came a strange calm, the kind that whispers, "You survived."
Daniel pressed his palms against the cold metal of the truck hood, grounding himself. He wasn't the man he used to be. That version of him, soft, open, unquestioning, had been shattered the moment Emily hid the truth from him. But from those broken pieces, something new was forming, something steadier, sharper, wiser. And whether Emily liked it or not, this new version of Daniel was not someone she could simply walk back into. He sat back in the driver's seat, letting the engine hum beneath him. Before pulling away, he finally looked at his phone. One unread message. Just 5 words. "Please don't shut me out." He exhaled slowly, a long, painful breath. She didn't know. She didn't understand yet. He wasn't shutting her out. He was letting himself in. And as he drove back toward town, headlights cutting through the dark, one thought pulsed through him like a heartbeat. Forgiveness is freedom, but freedom always comes with a price.
Daniel didn't expect forgiveness to feel this heavy, this strangely suffocating. He'd imagined that somewhere inside the act of letting go, he would find relief, maybe even a sense of peace. But instead, what he found was a quiet uneasiness resting on his chest like an invisible weight. Emily sensed it too, not through words, but through the careful way Daniel moved around her, the way he paused before speaking, the way a silence stretched just a little too long between them. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred. It was something far more unsettling, a version of Daniel she had never seen before, and perhaps a version she never wanted to face. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried to rebuild something that resembled their old rhythm. He showed up to dinner, he answered her calls, he smiled at her jokes, but all of it came with a distance, a thin, icy layer she couldn't melt no matter how hard she tried. Emily kept grabbing his hand in public, and Daniel kept letting her, but his fingers never curled back around hers the way they once did. She told herself it was just the healing process, that he needed time. But deep down, she could feel the truth pressing like a cold finger against her spine. Daniel had forgiven her, yes, but he had stepped into a different emotional world, one where she no longer had free access. And that terrified her. One night, Emily showed up at Daniel's apartment with homemade dinner, something she used to do when they were first dating, a gesture filled with nostalgia, warmth, and desperate hope. Daniel opened the door and gave her a gentle smile, the kind of smile that made her feel both loved and distant at the same time. She followed him inside, noticing how he had rearranged the living room. His old photograph wall, filled with memories of them, was almost bare. Only one picture remained, a single frame of them sitting by the lake in Colorado, smiling at the camera. That photo used to be surrounded by dozens. Now it stood alone, like a lonely reminder of what was left. Emily froze. "You took them down." Daniel didn't look at the wall, just making space for new things. His tone was calm, almost too calm, and something about that calmness scared her more than if he had yelled. During dinner, she tried to pull him into conversation, stories from work, upcoming plans, funny moments she thought might break the tension. But Daniel stayed quiet, offering short replies, drifting off into thought every few seconds, as if his mind belonged somewhere she couldn't reach anymore. At one point, she reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I just want us to feel normal again." Daniel looked at her, truly looked at her, but his eyes were different now, softer and colder at the same time. "Normal doesn't come back just because we want it to," he said quietly. "Sometimes you break something, and even if you glue it together, the cracks are still there." Her throat tightened. "But you forgave me." "I did. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was." She swallowed hard, feeling panic rising. "Then what does it mean, Daniel?" He leaned back in his chair, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means I'm choosing not to carry the anger anymore, but I'm not choosing to be the same man I was before." Emily didn't know what to say. She felt like she was sitting across from a stranger wearing Daniel's face. The man who once held her like she was the only thing keeping his world balanced now looked at her with a quiet detachment that felt like 1,000 small cuts. and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had created this version of him, piece by piece, lie by lie. Later that night, as they sat together on the couch, Emily rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, a position she used to slip into effortlessly. But now, his shoulder felt stiff beneath her, not rejecting her, just not welcoming her either. A neutral space, a space she didn't know how to fill. Daniel, meanwhile, was drifting through memories he wished he could erase. Every time Emily touched him, he felt the flicker of warmth, followed by an echo of the moment he discovered her betrayal. He wasn't punishing her intentionally. He wasn't playing a game, but the truth was simple. He didn't trust her the same way anymore, and trust, once cracked, builds back like thin glass, delicate, easily shattered. Emily's voice trembled as she broke the silence. "Do you still love me?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink into the air between them. Finally, he spoke in a soft, steady tone. "Love doesn't disappear overnight." Then he opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. "But it can change shape." Emily's heart dropped. That answer, that gentle, careful answer, told her everything she feared. Daniel still loved her, but not with the certainty he once did, not with the devotion she had taken for granted. And in that moment, she felt something unexpected, not just regret, but the early sting of consequences she had never imagined. Because Daniel's silence, his distance, his new boundaries, they weren't temporary. They were becoming permanent. And that was the beginning of her real punishment.
There are moments in life when silence becomes louder than words. When a single look, a single pause, a single breath carries the weight of everything unspoken. And for Daniel, that moment came on a quiet Thursday evening, a week after he and Emily had talked about rebuilding whatever fragments of their relationship were still left. He wasn't avoiding her, but he wasn't reaching for her either. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't warm. He was there, present, but just barely, like a ghost of the man he once had been. Emily noticed it, every second of it. She watched him move around the house with a strange calmness, almost too controlled, too measured. The Daniel she used to know would fill the room with laughter, little jokes, random stories about people he'd met during the day. But now, he was quiet, observant, distant. And every time she tried to step closer, every time she tried to touch his hand or lean against his shoulder, he would pause. Not pull away, not reject her, just pause. As if measuring the moment, as if deciding whether she still had the right to be close to him. Those pauses hurt more than shouting would have. Emily began to realize that this quiet wall between them might be the real consequence of her actions. Not anger, not punishment, not dramatic confrontation, just emotional distance. And she couldn't figure out whether Daniel meant to do it or whether it was simply who he had become after everything. One night, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, Emily finally whispered, "I feel like I'm losing you, even though you're right here." Daniel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the screen, though he wasn't really watching. "I'm still here, just not the way I used to be." Emily's chest tightened. Is this your way of forgiving me?" Daniel breathed slowly, deeply, as if choosing his next words with care. "Forgiveness doesn't bring things back. It just lets you stop bleeding. But scars stay." Emily turned off the TV. The room fell into complete silence, except for the sound of Daniel's slow breathing. She touched his arm gently, her voice trembling. "I'm trying, Daniel. I swear to you, I am trying so hard to fix this." He finally looked at her, but the softness she used to see in his eyes wasn't there anymore. Not fully. Not in the same way. "I know you're trying, and I'm not pushing you away. I'm just not the man you hurt. I rebuilt myself, Emily, and that version of me doesn't break the same way." It was the most honest thing he had said to her in weeks.
Emily felt tears forming, but she held them back. She didn't want to cry. She wanted to understand. She wanted to repair what she had broken, but now she knew that repairing something didn't mean it would look the same again. Over the next several days, Daniel continued to surprise her. He became more social, more active, more focused on himself. He started waking up early, going for long morning runs again, something he used to love but had stopped doing months before. He joined a boxing gym too, something he had always wanted to try. He bought new clothes, changed his haircut, even started reading different kinds of books. He wasn't reinventing himself for her, he was reinventing himself despite her. Emily watched this all with a painful mix of pride and fear. She loved seeing him grow, loved seeing him find strength in places he had forgotten. But she also worried, because with every change, she felt the distance growing, widening, stretching into something she couldn't reach across. One afternoon, she decided to join him on his run. He slowed down when he saw her approaching, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You don't have to keep up with me," he said kindly. "I want to." She forced a smile. "Okay." But even as they ran side by side, Emily felt like she was chasing a version of Daniel she no longer knew. His steps were more confident, his breathing steadier, his focus sharper. He wasn't running away from anything. He was running towards someone he needed to become. That realization terrified her. Later that night, she sat alone in the living room, scrolling through photos on her phone. Pictures of Daniel smiling, laughing, holding her hand, kissing her forehead. Pictures of road trips, birthday dinners, late-night ice cream runs. Pictures of a relationship that now felt like a dream she could almost remember, almost touch, but not fully bring back. Daniel walked in quietly, noticing the glow of her screen. "Old pictures?" he asked gently. "Yeah, I miss this." He stood behind her. Not too close, not too distant. Just there. "I miss it too," he said, almost in a whisper. "But you're not fighting for it. You're moving forward, but I feel like you're leaving me behind." Daniel took a slow breath. "I'm not leaving you behind, Emily. I'm moving forward because I have to. What happened changed me. I can't pretend it didn't." Emily looked up at him, tears finally breaking loose. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do, please. Tell me how to reach you." Daniel stared at her. Not coldly, not harshly, but with a heartbreaking softness. "You can walk beside me, but you can't expect me to walk back to who I was." And with that sentence, Emily finally understood the truth. She wasn't losing Daniel. She was losing the version of him she had taken for granted. And that was a different kind of pain altogether.
There are moments in life when silence becomes the loudest sound in the world, when everything you've held inside, every memory, every wound, every unanswered question finally rises to the surface and demands to be felt. That's where Daniel stood now. After everything he had endured, after every tear, every night spent staring at the ceiling wondering why, he found himself in a place he never expected to reach. Not revenge, not bitterness, not heartbreak, but clarity. A clarity that came slowly, almost painfully, as if life was peeling away the last pieces of who he once was. And in that clarity, Daniel discovered the truth he had been trying so hard to outrun. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your heart. Sometimes, it's about finally letting yourself out. For weeks, Emily had been trying to bridge the distance Daniel had quietly built around himself. She tried gentle conversations, long messages, unexpected visits, anything to pull him closer. But Daniel had changed in ways she could feel but couldn't quite understand. There was a calmness in him now, a controlled quiet that scared her more than any anger ever could. She would see him smile, but the smile never reached his eyes. She would hear him speak, but the warmth that once lived in his voice was gone. It was as if the version of Daniel she fell in love with existed only in memories, fading a little more each day. One evening, Emily asked him to take a walk with her, just a simple walk, something they used to do all the time. Daniel agreed, but the decision didn't come from affection. It came from a desire to see where this chapter needed to end. The night air was cool, brushing softly against their skin as they walked down the quiet Texas street. The sky stretched wide and starless above them. Emily kept glancing at him, studying him, searching for something familiar in the shadows of his face. "Daniel," she said softly, do you still love me?" He walked for a few seconds in silence, then another few seconds, and those seconds felt like hours to Emily, hours of dread and desperation. Finally, Daniel exhaled, a slow, tired sigh that sounded like the release of something he'd been carrying for too long. "I love who we used to be, but I don't know if I can love what we've become." Those words hit her harder than any accusation, any anger, harder than the truth she had confessed weeks ago. Her steps slowed, then stopped. Daniel stopped too, turning to face her under the dim glow of a streetlight. Emily's eyes shimmered, filling with tears that threatened to fall but didn't quite yet. "I thought forgiving me meant we could fix things," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded gently. "Forgiving you was never the hard part," he replied. "The hard part was forgiving myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too blindly, for loving so hard that I lost pieces of myself." Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "But I want to make this right. I don't want to lose you." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment he felt the echo of the love they once shared, the warmth, the softness, the dreams they had built together. But that echo carried something else too, a reminder of the pain, the betrayal, the nights he spent breaking over her lies. "You're not losing me," he said gently. "You already did. The day you hid the truth, that version of me, the one who believed in us without fear, he died that day." Emily's tears finally fell, sliding down her cheeks as she shook her head desperately. "Daniel, please, don't say that." He stepped closer, not out of affection, but out of honesty. "Emily, forgiveness woke me up. It made me realize that I wasn't meant to stay in places that break me. I don't hate you. I don't wish you pain. I can't go back to who I was. And I can't pretend that what we had still exists." The silence that followed was heavy, heartbreaking, final. Emily pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to breathe through the ache in her chest. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to take back every mistake she had ever made. But nothing could change the truth that stood in front of her. Daniel was done. Not out of anger, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. He reached out gently, placing his hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture, but one weighted with closure. "You'll heal, and so will I. But our healing, it can't happen together." With that, Daniel turned away. Step by step, breath by breath, he walked into the distance, not rushing, not breaking, just leaving. And with every step, Emily felt something slip further out of reach. The future she had imagined, the love she had taken for granted, the man who once would have done anything for her. She watched him until he disappeared into the darkness, and only then did she fall to her knees, the night swallowing her sobs. Because she finally understood the weight of his silence, the sharpness of his calm, the truth behind his forgiveness. Daniel didn't seek revenge. Daniel became the revenge. A quiet, unforgettable ending, where the one who caused the pain learned the hardest lesson of all. When you break someone who loved you deeply, their forgiveness might save your conscience, but their absence will haunt your soul.